All right. Well, hello and good evening, and welcome to our final YouTube Live exam review of the school year. This is Mr. Ippolito. I'm pleased to have you here. Thanks to everybody who's here live, as well as to everyone who is watching the recording. One way or the other, whether you're with us here in person or watching a little bit after the fact, great to have you here as we prepare for our final unit exam of the year, and that's going to be on the Civil War. So as always throughout the year, I've had my daughter Libby. So Libby is just off camera. Thank you, Libby, for being here. Libby will be monitoring the chat for questions. Speaking of the chat, if you are on live and if you'd like a shout out live on our YouTube live review, go ahead and drop your name in the chat right now. You can say hello or just a little something, and would love to give you a shout out. And as well as if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask, because I would love to answer them for you. The questions can either be about content or they can be about the nature of the exam itself. I will tell you that at this time, and I pushed this out earlier in Google Classroom, I currently have 36 multiple choice. I've written this test from scratch. So sometimes with other exams, I'll kind of pull pieces from here and there, or kind of start off with a previous exam and build from that. But this is entirely brand new for 2023. So I'm very excited and feel really good because this exam specifically reflects exactly what we have been learning in class. So give a shout out to Faith. Hello, Faith. Welcome. And so currently right now, 36 multiple choice questions. I have not yet decided how many free response or short answer questions that I'm going to give you, but as promised, I will give you no more than 3 short answer questions. So the number will either be 3 or fewer. So that's what you can expect. And hello, Melanie. Pleased to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Okay. So having said that, and until you start throwing specific questions in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and just go through and explain to you my process for how I built this particular exam and how you can best set yourself up for success and make sure that you are doing the studying from the resources that I am recommending. So this is very much this particular exam. And let me go ahead and let me do a screen share here because I think it will help to show this. And Libby, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm sharing the correct screen, that I'm sharing. I'm actually sharing my, it should show like Google Classroom period 1 U.S. History and Government. Want to make sure it's on a little bit of a delay. So you'll see it in just a moment. But if I'm sharing the correct screen, that I'm sharing Google Classroom right now. And then in just a moment, I will be sharing my study guide. So I think I'm in the right place. Okay, good. I built this exam directly from the study guide. So there's really very little that you're going to find that is not from the study guide resources, from the vocabulary. Like I really wanted to make sure that, sometimes teachers, myself included, sometimes we throw things into exams and students are like, where did that even come from? I don't even remember seeing that on the study guide. So this is definitely a study guide based exam. All right. And then just as a reminder, we have it's actually periods 5 and 6 tomorrow. And then because of our strange schedule, we have periods 1 and 4 on Wednesday. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just start off with our first topic, which was the biggest differences between North and South. So this is as the United States approached the Civil War. So really, this is the part of our class where and hello, Bella, give you a shout out as well. This is the part of the class where we learned about the time period, like the 10-year period leading up to the Civil War. So this is like 1850 to 1860. And the 3 resources that we drew from most were the Oversimplified, the Causes of the Civil War, and the Causes video. So this Oversimplified right here, this was just kind of the lead up to the Civil War, right? And honestly, I'm going to, I think if you were to focus on these notes, I would focus most on, so number 1, the states' rights issue that was causing all of this conflict throughout the United States. What is the number 1 cause of the Civil War? There are plenty of historians who have all sorts of theories and things that they want to say, but nearly every historian agrees that the number 1 cause of the Civil War was slavery, right? So don't get it twisted. It is slavery as the number 1 cause. Yes, states' rights were a factor, and yes, political differences and economic differences and social differences and all those differences between North and South. But at the end of the day, all of those differences were rooted in slavery. I think the part of, if we're talking about the Compromise of 1850, we learned a little bit about that. I think the part of the Compromise of 1850 that is the most relevant to our learning is going to be the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act, if you recall from our learning here, as well as our learning from the movie Harriet, the Fugitive Slave Act really changed things in 1850, because now all of a sudden people in the North they were recruited and were punished if they did not help in capturing enslaved people who had run away from the South and escaped to the North. So all of a sudden now it turned people in the North into slave catchers, right? Everybody had to be responsible for the return of runaway slaves, or they faced punishment. So that was, if we're talking about the Compromise of 1850, that was really probably the biggest, the most controversial, and the most impactful in terms of pushing our nation a little bit closer to civil war. The other thing that I think I want to point out from this assignment, what was the South so worried about when Abraham Lincoln was elected president? If you recall, I did kind of there are some callbacks to our lesson on the election of 1860. I did not put that in the study guide, but if you remember the election of 1860, that lesson, and I'll go ahead and pull that up. Since you're here, I will go ahead and show you what that looks like, loading it up over here on my other screen. Election of 1860. Just want to make sure I give you the correct. But if you recall, after the election of 1860, and by the way, Lincoln won by an electoral landslide, right? So if you were, let me go ahead and just bring this over. All right. Just want to make sure that Google Drive is behaving. There we go. Okay. So if you recall this lesson here, right, the election of 1860 was between four men: Lincoln, Breckinridge, Bell, and Douglas. And then we took a look at the map, the electoral map. And actually, we can go ahead and we'll look at that map right now, because if we go to the historical elections timeline, and if we just go back in time to 1860, you'll recall that it felt much more contentious at the time we had this conversation in class. It felt closer. It felt much more contentious. However, when you look at the numbers, you look at the electoral numbers, and you look, Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot in 10 southern states. But you look at the population difference, because the Electoral College is based on population, right? You look at the population difference, Georgia with 10 electoral votes, Texas with 4, Arkansas with 4, Louisiana with 6. And then you compare it to these heavy hitter northern states: Pennsylvania, 27 electoral votes, Ohio with 23, Illinois with 11, Indiana with 13, New York with 35, Massachusetts 13. These southern states, because they were so much more spread out, because they were more rural, right? People lived a more spread out life. And also because of the population of the South, there were 7 million people living in the South by 1860. 3 million of those were enslaved. And so they could not vote at all, right? So you only have, you're looking at a population of, 22 million in the North versus 4 million white population of 4 million in the South. So the North had a huge population advantage. And as a result, they can very easily, anybody who is running on a regional ticket, a sectional platform, right? A platform that is going to benefit North versus South, they're totally going to win in this situation, which is why Lincoln wins big in the election of 1860 with 180 electoral votes versus, you look at the combined totals, this is, 100 and change here for the 3 other candidates combined. Libby is looking at me as if to say, we have something in the chat. That's a great question. No. So for this, sorry, Sarah, and to everybody else who's watching, no, this is this last exam here. It's just going to be you and your brain and the test right in front of you. So that's why a little extra study and review is going to be, it'll be really important, because it's just going to be you and the exam for this last one. So thank you. Great question. So anyway, getting back to, because I want to eventually jump back into the exam review. This was the election of 1860. Lincoln won big, and Lincoln struck fear into the Southerners. That's my dog, Bella. Hello, Bella. Lincoln struck fear into the Southerners because they were afraid that Lincoln was going to take away. Oh, she's really she's really upset by something here. The South, speaking of upset, the South was really upset. I think she's upset because there's still food sitting on the table from dinner. So, but the South was really upset because they were somehow convinced that Abraham Lincoln was going to end slavery in the United States. They were somehow convinced that his presidency was going to be the beginning of the end of slavery, which ironically they were right. Because they just didn't know it yet, but they were right. Abraham Lincoln's presidency would bring about the end of slavery, just not in the way that they were originally fearful of. Okay, so I think that is important. Is there another question?
Questions that are going to be on the test officially.
Well, yo, Oliver, it is great to hear from you. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned right at the top of the recording, we do have currently, I have a total of 36 multiple choice questions that are currently on the exam. Of course, that could change. But as it stands right now, I have 36 multiple choice. I have not yet decided on my short answer questions, but those are always much easier for me to write, more challenging for students to answer, but much easier for me to write. And of course, the written questions that are on the exam, they will all be based on the study guide, which we're about to get back to right now, because I think I've finished with this handout here. And now I'll jump into causes of the Civil War. Now, this reading that we did, either we did in class on paper or we did digitally. This is a really good reading. I want to tell you, this was the reading, if you recall, this was a teacher from Georgia, and she gives, it's really, really good. It has a lot of really good information, but this teacher does have a bias. She's from Georgia, and she has a pro-Southern bias. I'm not going to spend the time, because I could probably spend easily a good 15 or 20 minutes going over this reading, but here's the advice that I will give you. This is an excellent reading. I probably pulled a total of probably a good, out of these 36 multiple choice questions, there are probably a good 5, 6, or 7 questions that I pulled just from this reading. So I would recommend that you do the reading. I would also recommend that when you're done watching me live, that if you haven't done so at all, or if you haven't done so in a while, watch this causes video, because I think I was really good. Let's press pause here. I don't need to. Oh, stop. We don't need to have a video of me watching a video of Mr. Ippolito. This is 7 minutes and 19 seconds. It's really good. I really, you know how much I love to talk. This is it's a lot of really good information in a short amount of time. So I'm strongly going to encourage you to click on the causes video link here, because I think that's going to really, really help you to wrap your brain around a lot that was going on in the time period leading up to the Civil War. And again, probably a good 5, 6, 7 questions, I think, that were on the exam are from this reading. So I definitely think it's going to be worth your time to check that out. Union states, Confederate states, border states. Of course, you know what those are. The border states in particular, those were the states that were right in the middle, right? They were in between the Union and the Confederacy. They were states that allowed slavery. So these states were Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, and oh my goodness, why am I drawing a blank on Missouri? Almost forgot it. Sorry, Missouri. Almost forgot about Missouri. So Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, 4 states that were that still practiced slavery, but that stayed loyal to the Union. And that was super, super important. Let's just show the map here again. And let me just show you. Part of the reason why it's so important was because they were a valuable buffer in between the Union and the Confederacy when it came to the war. Another reason why they were so valuable, and I'll just show you here. So Virginia ended up going for the Confederacy, right? And here's Maryland right here. Well, Washington, D.C. is right here. So imagine what happens to Washington, D.C., to the White House, to the Capitol building, to Congress, if all of this land here secedes, right, and breaks away and joins the Confederacy. You have your capital city is entirely within enemy territory. You can't have that. That would not be a good, that's not good for your cause. That's not good for your country if your capital city is entirely located within the territory of the enemy that you're fighting against. So so Lincoln needed to keep Maryland, needed Delaware, Kentucky stayed loyal to the Union. In a famous quote, Lincoln says, "I would like to have God on my side, but I must have Missouri." So these border states were super, super valuable as a buffer zone in between Union and Confederacy. Okay, I think I have spoken enough now about this. And question is this from Shricharan? Are there any battles which we have to memorize? Shricharan, it's funny you mentioned that because I think I'm about to talk about some battles right about now. So this is the next thing. And so Charan, I will tell you that yes, there are some battles that I think are important, but you don't need to memorize like a ton of military history. Let me just explain what you should know. And again, I'm just going to base it off of the work that we've already done and just try to make life a little bit easier for you. So this right here, the Civil War by the numbers, from the crash course. This is fabulous. This was super helpful because it was a lot of really good information in a short amount of time. Again, talking about those border states, those very important border states there, talking about the numbers. I think I said 7 million in the South. I think I meant to say 9 million. I was 2 million off, but still 22 million population in the North versus the free population of 5 million in the South. So the Union had such a huge population advantage. So this, one of the questions on your test is going to, and I'm so glad that you're here to hear this because I'm going to be revealing little bits and pieces of questions from the test. One of the questions on the test is going to be about Union versus Confederate advantages. So what were the advantages? Well, you look at the numbers and they had a bigger population. They had more finished goods, right? So they had a greater manufacturing capacity, more textiles, which is just like fabrics, more shoes and boots, iron, firearms, more double the number of miles of railroad, and they could also enlisted over double the number of volunteers in the Army. Really, the only advantage that the South had was better military leaders like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, right? So those were examples. That's really one of the only major advantages that the South has. Talked about the war of attrition. We mentioned that quite a bit, right? The fact that the South, they were just seeing how long that they could hang on, but ultimately this was a war of attrition for both sides, right? How long can you outlast the other side? Because that's, at the end of the day, that's almost every war. Almost every war is you just simply have to last longer. You have to just hang on longer than your enemy. And if you can hang on longer, then you've won that war of attrition, right? You're just waiting long enough for the other side to just give up and decide we can't do this anymore. This was, I think, helpful too. Ulysses S. Grant. Ultimately, Lincoln is going to pick him as his lead general because he knows that he gets the victories, even if it's at a high cost. If you recall, Ulysses S. Grant, he was smart because he knew that he had the superior numbers. He knew that his army was so much bigger than the Confederate army. And so if he just kept throwing troops, soldiers after soldiers after soldiers at the enemy, that eventually he would win. Now, that does come at a very high cost, a very high casualty cost, right? But he knows that he still has the soldiers to spare, whereas eventually Robert E. Lee is not going to have those soldiers to spare as the war grinds to an end in 1864 and 1865. July 1863, the turning point of the war. I think that is important too, Sir Charan, to answer your question about what battles are important. Two of the most important battles of the Civil War, the Battle of Vicksburg and the Battle of Gettysburg, both take place at the beginning of July of 1863. Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. That's important because it was Robert E. Lee's second and final attempt to invade the North. You should be paying attention because this might be in your my daughter is taking a U.S. history class over the summer through COC. So this is all good stuff for you, Libby. Robert E. Lee, his second attempt to try to invade the North, right? He's hoping that if he can invade and if he can cut through Pennsylvania, I should not have gotten rid of that map. I'll just put up another map here. Oh, you know what I really should do is I should put up Civil War map. That would be helpful because then you can see. Thank you. I'll get to that question in just a moment. Let's just open up this image right here. So Robert E. Lee's strategy is if he can, because he's coming up from Virginia, so marches through northern Virginia and into Pennsylvania, and Gettysburg is somewhere right around here. And so Robert E. Lee, as the Confederate general, his thought is, if I can smash the Union army here in Pennsylvania, then swing down and capture Washington, D.C. If Lee could capture Washington, D.C., then again, when you capture the capital city, it's almost like game over, right? You decapitate your enemy, you cut off that capital city. And so that's what Robert E. Lee was trying to do in his second attempt to invade the North. You know that the first attempt was the Battle of Antietam. You remember they found Lee's battle plans wrapped around a bundle of cigars, and so that's what helped the North win the Battle of Antietam. Antietam was in Maryland. That was Robert E. Lee's first attempt to invade the North unsuccessfully, because the Union won there, and then the Union is going to win again at the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and then immediately following the Battle of Gettysburg, Ulysses S. Grant, at this time, he's out in the West, and he's right here on the Mississippi River, and he wins the very key Battle of Vicksburg. And so that is going to, the Union had already captured New Orleans in Louisiana. And so after capturing New Orleans, and then later in July of 1863, capturing Vicksburg, I'm stumbling over my words because I'm so excited about the Civil War, finally unlocked all of the Mississippi River, which was part of, have you heard of this plan named after a snake? This was the Union strategy. It was developed by Union General Winfield Scott. Nicki Minaj. It was the Anaconda Plan. Yes, the Anaconda Plan. And so, look for the Anaconda Plan to be on your exam as well. If you recall, there were 3 parts of the Anaconda Plan. The first part was to surround Confederate ports. As a matter of fact, I think if I just go back here, we'll just scroll down and we'll look at the Anaconda Plan, right? Step 1, and thank you to whoever took these notes in period 5. Oh, I think this is Harper. So I'm going to give a shout out to Harper Morris. Thanks, Harper. The Anaconda Plan, capture the Mississippi River. So captured New Orleans. And you can hear my dog Bella is really excited about the Anaconda Plan as well. Number 1, capture the Mississippi River by capturing New Orleans, and then later at Vicksburg. Number 2, a naval blockade around the port cities of the South that prevents the South from being able to trade, especially their number 1 item, which is cotton, because if they could sell cotton to the countries of Europe, then they could make money. And because we know, after all, wars cost a lot of money. So the Union was able to shut down that trade by blockading southern ports, and then finally capturing the capital city, that was Richmond, Virginia. And so you decapitate, right? Because it's that Latin root capitas, which means head. You cut off the head of the snake. You cut off the head of the South by capturing the capital city of Richmond. Okay. I think that was just about it. Oh, and then there's a little bit of a discussion of Sherman's march to the sea, and I think we see that someplace else too. I think that's in the oversimplified part 2 is Sherman's march to the sea, Sherman capturing the Southern Railroad hub of Atlanta, and really just sort of final. This was in 1864, just the final, like, pulling the wind out of the sails of the South. If they had one final chance, it was taken away completely by General William T. Sherman, in his march to the sea between South Carolina and Georgia in 1864. Okay. So that was, we've just finished Crash Course U.S. History Civil War by the Numbers. Do we have any other questions coming in? Oh, I don't think necessarily, Melanie, great question. No dates that you have to memorize per se, but I think it's helpful to kind of know a general progression of kind of when things happened, right? So you know that those events that were leading up to the Civil War, events like let's just go back here really quickly to this one right here. So those events from oversimplified or from causes of the Civil War, I'll open this one up just because it's annotated so beautifully already. So I think just to kind of know the general timeline, right? Like the Articles of Confederation, stuff that we've been learning all year long, kind of led up to the Civil War, right? And then the Constitution is ratified in 1787. It is written and then later ratified. All 13 states ratified the Constitution. I made this point when I did my 7-minute and 41-second video of causes of the Civil War. And then kind of moving forward, you have abolitionism, right? So this is happening as we get closer to the Civil War. Uncle Tom's Cabin is published in 1851. You have the Underground Railroad that is running in the 1840s and 1850s with Harriet Tubman. You've got the John Brown raid that was part of that came about. He first had his participation in Bleeding Kansas, and later the John Brown raid in 1859, the Dred Scott decision, Supreme Court decision in 1857. So like all of these things, there's the John Brown raid at Harper's Ferry in 1859. So really kind of all of these things. So Melanie, to answer your question, do we need to know dates? You kind of need to know a progression. You need to know an order. And then the tipping point that finally pushes the country into civil war, I'm going to argue, is the election of 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln in November of 1860, because in that following month, right, in December of 1860, that's when South Carolina was, in the words of this Georgia teacher here, was the first state to dissolve its contract. Like it's a contract with AT&T or Verizon, right? Like it's a cell phone contract. Like you can just easily turn it on or off. And Abraham Lincoln, in his first inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln is going to push back on that assertion, right? That, oh, it was just a contract and they decided to just dissolve the contract. That's another thing that I want you to, let me look up inaugural address. This is Lincoln's 1861 inaugural, and I think it's right here. There we go. Oh, and that's actually, that link is going to be coming up because that's in the study guide. So let me just go ahead and just continue to go through the study guide here. So yes, Melanie, sorry, getting back to your question. You should know kind of a progression of things. How we got there, the election of 1860, the war begins in 1861. It's going badly for the Union at first, right? And Lincoln is trying to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. It's 1862, the fall of 1862. Things are going badly for the Union. Finally, first big victory for the Union, Battle of Antietam in 1862. That allows Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which takes effect in January 1st, 1863. And so then 1863 is kind of that tipping point. And then you've got the battle in July of 1863, Battle of Gettysburg, Battle of Vicksburg. And then that continues. And then you get into 1864, Sherman's March, and then finally the surrender at Appomattox in 1865. So do you need to know a bunch of dates? No. Do you kind of need to know progression? I think you should. Okay. Moving on. I'm going to move on. This was the Ed puzzle. The Civil War battles. Did we already talk about oversimplified? Oh, I think this is, so oversimplified, I think, is probably good at just kind of reviewing stuff that we already previously learned. There's the Anaconda Plan again. There's a mention of Ulysses S. Grant. Oh, so this is good here, right? If you recall, one of the things from the first oversimplified video, the relationship between Abraham Lincoln and George McClellan, if you recall, it was a strained relationship, right? McClellan did not respect Lincoln. Lincoln just got frustrated with McClellan. Lincoln fired McClellan, but then he's like, I don't have a lot of really good generals. That was a failure of the North. There was not a whole lot of good military leadership in the North for the Union. My dog Bella agrees. And so he had to rehire McClellan, and then he fired him again. So if you remember in the video, the story of how Abraham Lincoln waited for hours and hours. He just wanted to talk to his general, his lead general in the Civil War. And so Lincoln patiently sat for hours, probably 3, 4, 5 hours at McClellan's home. McClellan finally comes home late at night. He was at a party or he was out drinking. I don't know what he was doing. But McClellan was notified, the president of the United States is in the parlor, the front parlor. He's waiting to see you. And McClellan's like, whatever. And McClellan goes upstairs and goes to sleep. And so that was the kind of contempt, the kind of disrespect that General George McClellan had for Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln eventually fired him for the second and final time. And then, of course, if you recall, George McClellan ran against Abraham Lincoln in the election of 1864, where Lincoln just like crushes him in the election, right? So that was a clear signal that the Union was happy enough. There was, Lincoln was a divisive president. Not everybody liked Lincoln, and several people in the Union hated Abraham Lincoln. But when push came to shove, and when American voters had to go to the polls and decide, do I want McClellan for president or do I want Lincoln for president? They overwhelmingly voted for Lincoln for president. And if you don't believe me, then we'll go to 270 to win, and we'll go to the electoral map. Let me zoom out a little bit here. Let's go to the electoral map of 1864. And you can see, this might just end up being on the exam, by the way. You can look, it's totally going to be on the exam. You can look at the electoral map of 1864 and how well did Lincoln do versus McClellan? Well, he just trounced him. And again, if you're wondering, well, Mr. Ippolito, I had this question asked, Mr. Ippolito, why is it 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0? Well, the reason why there are zeros all across the South is because these states had seceded. These states had withdrawn from the Union. And were actively in rebellion, right? Actively in insurrection and rebellion against the Union. So it was going to be a little bit difficult for them to participate in a United States election when they currently do not consider themselves part of the United States. So you can see New Jersey, Delaware, Kentucky all voted. Their electoral votes went for George McClellan. So that's a total of 21 electoral votes versus 212 electoral votes for Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln trounced him in the election of 1864. Okay. So Civil War by the numbers. Again, this is just trying to make it as easy as possible for you to just study. These are the things that you need to study. And then finally, that Civil War battles Ed puzzle. So you can watch that Civil War battles video all over again if you'd like to review for that. Moving into 6-3, right? This is the leaders and soldiers of the Civil War. So what do you need to know? First of all, we watched the Civil War rages, right? So we watched this video from the History Channel, and you did the ABC graphic organizer. So I'm going to go ahead and really quickly pull that up because while I did not fill it out, I do have just like some inspiration, I think. And so this might help you because you should have this. I handed this back to you, right? So this was that ABC graphic organizer, the one where you had to take notes that, corresponded to each letter of the alphabet, right? So one of the things, for example, bullets, this is a thing that you might see on the exam, bullets, or you've got the mini ball. If you recall, one of the things that was mentioned early on in the video was that the technology of the Civil War was so much deadlier because weapons technology had made this huge advancement, but tactics in terms of where people marched, where soldiers marched, how close soldiers got to each other, that had not changed since the time of Napoleon. It had not changed since the time of the Revolution or the War of 1812 or even the Mexican-American War. Armies got if you recall, when we watched the movie The Alamo, soldiers got relatively close to each other on a battlefield because guns used to not be very accurate. Well, now with rifling, with the mini ball, bullets were not only could fly farther, they could fly faster, but they also flew straighter too, right? So the distance at which you were, based on previous tactics from the War of 1812 or the Mexican-American War or the Texas War for Independence, right? The closeness that they would get, that would be so deadly in the Civil War because weapons technology, this mini ball, it could fly farther, straighter, faster, and much deadlier because if you recall from the video, when it would hit, it would shatter bone and it would just tear apart flesh, and it was disgusting. So that was, honestly, that was one of the big takeaways from this. But also this was like more review of things that we had already learned about, writing in diaries, letter writing home, Sherman's March we learned about in this video. So this was another really, really good video, mostly to kind of like bring to life a lot of the stuff that we were already learning about previously. Okay, and then finally, love and war. I did put a few questions about love and war, the Civil War love letters lesson. I did put a few of those, so I think this is worth, you should have gotten this back. And if you were absent when I handed this back, you'll go ahead and or if you just turned it in recently, then you'll get this back and I'll give you a few minutes to study before the exam begins. But basically just kind of the things that we learned about during this time, that soldiers, for the most part, soldiers were, they were writing, what were they writing home about? And who were they writing to? They were writing to their wives. They were writing to brothers or sisters. They were writing to sweethearts, even their children, right? So they were writing to friends or family or loved ones. And they were writing about things like, what was going on during the war, and or talking about life back home, or talking about how the children are growing up or going to school, or they really just wanted to kind of keep each other up to date on what was going on, right? And to give the other hope, and to give the other like, hey, I miss you, I love you, I miss you, I can't wait until you come home. And of course, as we know, especially with this heartbreaking Sullivan Ballou letter, Some of them never did make it home, right? But most of them it was just about love, but also about like politics, because this was a very literate society. They read newspapers and they were and they valued education. And so so it's worth kind of looking through. And if you scroll all the way down to the end of your handout and kind of look at your notes, like what were those things that people really cared about? What did people love during the time of the Civil War? So I think that's worth looking at as well. Okay, and then finally, the last thing is, originally I had this grand plan of studying multiple speeches of Abraham Lincoln's. Really, it just came down to his 1861 inaugural, and so I think this is worth watching. And if you do not, let me just go ahead and add this in here. Video and handout. So this video here, that is the link to the video. I'm updating these notes as we speak. And then the handout, I want to provide my annotated notes, because we spent quite a bit of time on this speech. And I'm going to annotated text. I think I've annotated this probably 3 different times. This is how much I love this speech. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to add this link for you so that you can check this out as well. And okay, so and now let me just show you what this looks like, because again, we spent quite a bit of time looking at Lincoln's first inaugural. When I say first inaugural, the reason why I say that is because there were 2. He was inaugurated once in 1861, and then he was inaugurated again in 1865, but this was his 1861 inaugural, the first time that he gave this speech. So he starts off by saying, you know what, South, I just got elected and you're nervous, and understandably so, but you can just chill. Like it's okay. I do not intend to interfere with slavery where it already exists. So you just need to calm down. Those of you who are seceding and breaking away and thinking that your rights are going to be threatened, your rights to take away the rights of others, right? I mean, that's really those are the rights that we're talking about. You just need to chill, just calm down. That's the first section. And then he talks about the fugitive slave law. And he says, you know what? There has been a lot of hurt feelings and people upset about the fugitive slave law, but we follow the Constitution, we follow the law. So we have been following the law. By the way, speaking of following the law, we should follow all of the law, right? Including protecting the rights of free blacks in the North and the South. We should be doing that also, right? South, he's kind of given a little bit of a dig to them here in section 3. Section 4, he says, you know what? There have been 15 presidents before me. And yeah, they were distinguished and they did a great job, but none of them has had the challenge that I have faced, which is a disruption of the federal union, heretofore only menaced, right? So there's been talk for a lot of years about breaking away, about the South seceding and breaking away, but it's finally happening now. And so this is like, I am facing a challenge greater than any other president has faced. Let's move on. And so he continues, and this is pushing back against the argument that teacher from Georgia is making, the whole idea of a contract. Well, the South Carolina just decided that they were going to leave and they were going to end the contract with the United States. Well, you look at Abraham Lincoln's 1861 inaugural, he says that the union of these states is perpetual. Perpetuity is implied, if not expressed, in the fundamental law of all national governments. In other words, when governments are created, just like we created our Constitution, it is safe to assert that no government ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination. Nobody puts in a self-destruct button into their Constitution. This was when we talked about Perry the Platypus, and we talked about Dr. Doofenshmirtz. You remember Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb? We used to watch it all the time growing up when you were a kid. Hi, Libby. Again, my daughter Libby is here. She's monitoring the chat. So far, no questions in the chat recently. But again, it was that idea of Lincoln is saying that there is no self-destruct button that built into the Constitution. There is no reasonable expectation. Like, why would the founders of the Constitution, by the way, James Madison, a slaveholder and a Southerner, was the author of most of the Constitution. He didn't build in a self-destruct button, right? So you can't, You can't say, well, we'll just decide to end the contract. No country is going to build a self-destruct mechanism into its own nation. That's just, you can't do that. And if you're calling this a contract, if this is truly a contract, doesn't every party of the contract need to vote to dissolve the contract? Not just one state or two states or 7 states or however many states. Everybody needs to agree to dissolve the contract because, again, he's a lawyer. He's building a legal case against secession. So now he's calling it insurrection. He's calling it treason in Section 7. You think that you're going to form this nation, this nation of seceded states, and you think you're going to like come together and you're all going to find common ground, and you think you're all going to be like, good luck with that. So again, he's kind of like another little dig at the new Confederacy here. He compares it to divorce. We cannot separate. We cannot physically separate because we're connected to each other geographically. We can't do this. And so now this is when he finishes on a very conciliatory tone. He's ending on a tone of kindness and he's trying to keep the peace, right? He says, in your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine is the momentous issue of civil war. So you, the South, when he says dissatisfied fellow countrymen, he's talking about the South. The issue of civil war. Are people going to die? Are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, are they going to die? If so, it's on you. You decide whether or not we're going to have civil war, right? You have not made an oath to destroy this country, but I just moments ago, because this is at the inaugural, remember when the president of the United States places his left hand on the Bible and raises his right hand. By the way, under the Constitution, it doesn't have to be the Bible. It can be any book. It's just traditionally been the Bible. But I, as the president of the United States, raised my right hand and promised, I made a solemn oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And so that is what I'm going to do. And so he makes this promise to the South: don't test me, or I will follow through on my oath to preserve, protect, and defend this Constitution. And then finally, super ends with kindness and sweetness and love. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave. He's talking about the Revolution and the War of 1812 and the Mexican War and these wars where we fought together side by side, North and South. We are all in this together. High School Musical. And from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone. That hearthstone, he's referencing the fireplace, right? Because almost every home in America at that time has a hearthstone, a fireplace. This touches our homes. This touches our hearts. All over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of union. It's going to happen. We're all going to come together again as a nation, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. So let's come together. Let's come together in peace. That eventually will happen after the deaths of almost 750,000 Americans. We will come together in peace, but it's going to take a while. Okay. Okay, so a couple of questions. First of all, Jatin asks, also, since Lincoln's first inaugural is on the test, is the second? Jatin, great question. You know what? Again, like I was just mentioning, I had a grand plan. To teach you about all of the speeches of Abraham Lincoln. I just need for you to know the one that we just talked about, the 1861 inaugural, because that's all the time we had for it. And I think it'd be fair for me to test you on speeches that you haven't learned about. So just that 1861 inaugural, but that's enough. That's plenty. And it's a really good speech. So that's the one that I just spent the last 10 minutes on. And then Melanie asks, hi, do we have to know all the wars' names and the order of the wars? And I think you mean the battles, Melanie. So do you need to know battles? You need to know the most significant battles and why they're important. So that was in number 2. So the only battles that I would ask you about, attack on Fort Sumter, which actually isn't even a battle. It's the attack. It's the spark that starts the Civil War. Battle of Bull Run, the first battle. That's the battle. Remember where, they brought picnic baskets out on the lawn, and they're like, oh, the people are like, oh, this will be a little fun outing. And it turns out, oh, people are dying and there's blood. And that's when they realized, both North and South, they realized that this war was going to be a lot longer than they originally anticipated. The Battle of Antietam, that was the first attempt for Robert E. Lee to invade the North. He failed that time. Battle of Gettysburg, second time Robert E. Lee tried to invade the North, again, failed. That was the turning point, Gettysburg and Vicksburg right there. Sherman's March, I already talked about, and then Appomattox, the place where the surrender happened. These are the only battles or locations from the Civil War that I'm going to ask you about. That's it. And Melanie, yes, I got you. So that's, okay. So are there any other questions that I'm missing, Libby? Okay. I think honestly, this exam is pretty straightforward. I think that's it. So I think if you use your notes, if you use those couple of videos that I shared, if you just know this vocabulary, like this exam is truly an exam based on the study guide. And I really didn't go, that really much farther out of the study guide. If you know the study guide, then you're going to be and the resources here, then I think you're going to be in good shape. Okay. I'm going to wait another moment to see if we have any other questions. Oh, can you please answer? Oh, I did. Oh, okay. And then are all the battles you just said in chronological order from Sacharan? Yes, I believe they are. Yes, because they all go attack on Fort Sumter, 1861, Bull Run, 1861, Antietam, 1862, Gettysburg and Vicksburg, 1863, Sherman's March, 1864, Appomattox, 1865. Yes, they do all go in order. And Appomattox, honestly, that really isn't even a battle. It's just the site of the surrender where Robert E. Lee and the Confederacy and the Army of Northern Virginia surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. It's going to take a couple more months until the final, like the last surrender. That's the big surrender, but it will take a couple more months, and that is why it's actually going to take. So Appomattox, the surrender at Appomattox took place in April of 1865, but the final surrender took place in June of 1865. On June 19th, 1865, that was when it was finally announced that the Civil War had ended and that slavery was ending all across the South. And June 19th, 1865, that is what is celebrated on Juneteenth, which is our newest federal holiday, the celebration of the end of slavery at the end of the Civil War. So a little fun fact about national holidays in the United States. Okay, well, in that case, I think that we are now done with everything, unless we have any more discussion. I think we're good. No more questions. Alrighty. Well, hey, it is now 7:46. You still have time. The sun is still out. It's not even dark yet. So you still have time to enjoy your final moments of your Memorial Day holiday weekend. And I'll look forward to seeing you periods 5 and 6. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our exam. And then periods 1 and 4. Look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Period 4, I'll see you both days in what is a weird last week of school schedule. But I look forward to seeing you in the next couple of days to all of my U.S. history students. Thank you so much for being here, and good luck studying. And I look forward to seeing you the next time in class. All right, take care. Enjoy. Have a great evening. Thank you. Bye-bye. Boom, done.